Hello, welcome to our second live streamed public Pccc meeting. We have had some apologies today from Professor Mark Gamsu, Leslie Smith, from Alan Wundell. Danny Hyde is going to be covering for Alan and for Brian Hughes. And from non-voting members, Dr. Nikki Bates, Sarah Burt, and also Mr. Greg Fell for this meeting. There are a couple of people that may have to leave early, so Victoria Linden may have to leave a few minutes early, and also Dr. Amir will be joining us a little late today. So if we can go from that onto the agenda. Have we any declarations of interest today for this agenda that haven't been declared on the usual document and relate to a particular agenda item? So I'm seeing shaking of heads. If something does come up that you think is a conflict of interest in the meeting, if you can draw my attention to it, please. So Ronnie, who's minuting today, can get that down. Abby?
I think it might just be worth noting that we have one item on the first item on the agenda is approval of the Stoma business case. While there's no direct conflict of interest, it's probably worth noting that colleagues in general practices will benefit, that practices will benefit from that service offer in the sense of reduced workload. So it might just be worth noting that.
Okay, thank you.
But I think we value their input in any event into the discussion.
Thank you. Okay, so the next item is about questions from members of the public, and we haven't had any questions for this meeting. If you have got questions, if you can please drop us an email for future meetings, and that we can look at it in advance to make sure we're able to answer at the meeting. Thanks. Welcome to Joe as well, who's joined us at the meeting for an item a bit later on. So if we could go on then to the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. So I'll go through them and just check by page if there are any amendments to the minutes. So the last meeting was the 15th of July. Look at page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, and 12 is the abbreviation. So I didn't see any raised hands or interruptions for those. So if we can accept those as a true record of the last meeting. And then if we can go on to matters arising. So the first item is about the Abbey Lane surgery in Totley Rise Medical Centre. We've recently had the EDEC results in, which is to do with the survey, and the results have been published, but we haven't had it analysed yet. And so we're going to discuss it at our meeting in November, sorry. So we want to recommend this item for closure. The next item is to do with the locum spend, which is open. That is on the agenda, is it? Or do you want to pick it up at this point?
Can I just add, so I did a comparison across CCGs and our spend wasn't out of line with that, but what I haven't been able to get is a trend analysis of increase in spend, because that's the query that we were specifically discussing at the meeting. So that item is still ongoing. Okay. But the workforce report in private just contains some further information about breakdown of locum claims.
Okay, so we'll discuss that part at the private meeting, so we can recommend that second part of this for closure. And the last item on there is the CCG and the LMC would hold further discussions on the development of the plan, which was discussed on September the 13th. Abby, is there any additional points from that meeting?
Yes, thank you. I had at our routine monthly meeting with the LMC, I discussed steps towards producing an OPAL report, and agreed that we'll work in conjunction with the LMC to progress that into implementation. So I will bring feedback here when I will bring up an update here once that report is in place and operational, to let the committee know what reporting looks like.
Okay, thank you, Abby. So we can recommend that one for closure, but it'll be on a future meeting for an update. Right. Are there any other matters arising that have not been covered on this planner? People want to raise? No. Okay, thank you. So if we can go then on to the first item on the agenda, which is about the stoma appliance ordering, and Joe is hopefully going to take us through the key points for this proposal.
So, sorry, Chris, can I just come in very quickly? I was on mute and I tried to jump in earlier. Just to clarify the conflicts of interest, I'm a locum GP. I work as a locum GP in Derbyshire, and I don't have any connections with any practices in Sheffield. Hence, I'm bringing the paper, and there aren't any conflicts of interest.
Okay, so did you want to say anything, Zach? Sorry, I didn't. Before
absolutely not. I would like Joe to take it.
Okay, but thanks for pointing that out. That's useful. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. You will have obviously had a chance to go through the paper, but essentially, the proposal is that we introduce a dedicated appliance ordering service available to all Sheffield General practices, and to include every patient, roughly about 1,800 patients living with a stoma in Sheffield. So I'm referring to it as an appliance ordering service because there is the potential, you'll have seen in the paper, that we could perhaps expand this to other types of equipment or appliances, such as SIP feeds or Zach, step in here, there's other things along these lines. So essentially, there has been a national driver to look at how we could get the most benefits from patients in this ordering process, and improve some of that quality of care for them. We also know that there is some waste in the system, and ways in which the dispensing appliance contractors influence quite heavily the level of ordering and the nature of the ordering, along with some of our clinicians feel that perhaps it's an area that has quite a specific knowledge base, and if we had a dedicated team of staff that could administer those orders, that would enable patients to receive a more supportive service with a greater understanding of the products that are needed. So this proposal is really that we have an ordering service available exclusively for these products. So every patient ordering their stoma appliances would be invited to register and asked to do so, to order all their appliances in future. This does mean that they would experience a change in how they order, but the different methods for ordering could remain the same. So for example, if they currently order digitally, and that serves them, if they currently order via telephone, etc., via email, all those can be accommodated within the service. So this proposal would take the whole job of repeat prescribing away from GP prescribers, and the pathway and the care for patients would be entirely delivered through this service. So no more stoma orders should come through to our GP colleagues, and the prescribing would take place with non-medical prescribers. associated within this team. We are currently working very closely with the 3 groups of stoma nurses in the city, so those at STH, the community-based nurses, and our nurse colleague at the Children's Hospital. So we're kind of co-designing the service with them and looking at where we can incorporate referrals, signposting support to them in a live, very active way as those orders and that registration process takes place. Final thing to say in terms of mobilisation, due to the challenges around the technical aspect of actually administering this and interfacing with the GP clinical systems, we're suggesting that we start in a sort of very incremental way. We start with one practice that is volunteered, and we get the system 1 sorted and integrated into the sort of this community unit thing we have to have, and then we'll move to an EMIS practice, and then perhaps very quickly look at getting the whole of that PCN on board. This isn't going to be a dragged out 6 months to a year process. It would be just to learn very quickly early on that we can get that right, and also work with the practice I'm quite concerned about the nature of the communications to our patients, because this is a change and we are asking them to do something differently, and it's an area of very sensitive ordering and care in their own management that can cause great upset and distress if it goes wrong. So we have a great focus group that are again working with us in designing the pathway and looking at the kinds of communication we'll have with these patients. So we have the staff to be able to do this in a very managed, personal way with those first few practices to try and get that right. So I think that's all I have to say. Over to you for questions.
Thanks, Jo. That was really useful. It sounds like a really good practice with the co-production and also the what you've put in place to get it implemented and the early learning. Have any questions for Jo or comments? Judy, sorry. Judy, and I've got Gareth. I didn't spot your hand straight away. Camouflaged hands. I don't know who first. Was you first, Gareth, or Judy?
I think Judy first.
Okay. Thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Jo, for talking through the paper. It's quite comprehensive, the information that's there. I've got you've already identified that the comms around this is going to have to be really quite well planned. But my question was particularly, question and suggestion. So the question relating to specifically people with mental health and learning disability, which, although smaller than the 1800 number, it's still significant in terms of 38 and 86 respectively. And I just wondered what plans were in place to use it as an opportunity to improve some of the communication, particularly for those people that don't use words to communicate and might need some easy read information. So that was one, and how that's going to be looked at, because I couldn't see that reflected in the EQIA. It said neutral impact, and I'm not sure, that needs to and then I just wondered whether, as a suggestion, looking at a paper later on, we're not doing as well perhaps as we could around mental health checks for people with learning disability and the mental health checks as well, physical health checks. And I just wondered if there's any way that, Zach may say that wouldn't work, but whether it could be linked to, in terms of the communication, the health checks, so that you could also get a kind of an improved uptake with those. So.
Thanks, Judy. Shall I come in there before Gareth, or I don't know?
That's okay. Yes.
Yeah. I thank you so much for picking up on that very specifically. I personally haven't picked up specifically on that group of patients in terms of really using this as an opportunity to facilitate better the communication things for this group. It is usually on our radar in terms of any sort of leaflet or whatever that we might produce. But I think to give it more attention would be a good opportunity. So thank you for highlighting that, and we'll look to do that. I think given that we are being able to do this on a practice by practice basis, and we have the staff to literally have, in effect, face-to-face conversations with each person that registers, it does mean that we can pick up on that in terms of how we connect with those individuals and look at having the right support and means of communicating with them when we transfer people into this service. So we should, with the general practices, be able to identify who those patients are with learning disabilities or any other mental health severe need that impacts how they communicate. So in doing that, we should have a good insight into how we can then do that communication. So we'll certainly do that. And then in terms of physical health checks, I mean, I think it's probably something that hopefully we're considering in every aspect of when we have a patient contact, they're making every contact count. But certainly we could build that into any of the contact we have, which is, are you aware you're eligible for a physical health check? And, would you like to talk to your stoma nurse or general practice about this? So we could certainly use it as an opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Judy. Gareth?
Yeah, just a few comments really. I think it's certainly an improvement and step in the right direction. And I think it's good to hear that obviously you've got an appreciation of the communication around it and the change. And there may, as there always is when things change, there may be a few teething problems for the patients, but that's to be expected. And I think it's probably worth putting up with the teething problems to get to a better solution. I think it certainly does reduce wastage, because I know, speaking for myself, if no one else, we aren't very good, I imagine, GPs at prescribing the right stuff, and we could certainly save on the budget and that perspective. I think one of the real benefits from this is actually that at the moment, a lot of patients, once they've been discharged after having surgery and they've got a stoma for life with long-term management, they sort of eventually lose contact with the stoma nurses, and then they run into problems down the line, and they're contacting the GP, who's not the expert. They've lost contact with the stoma team. I think one of the intended or unintended consequences of this system, which is to a real benefit to the patients, is that if they're ordering through a central hub like this with input from the stoma nurses, there's a way of feeding back into it. If 20 years down the line after the operation they're there then having problems. So I think whether that was the intention or not, I think it's definitely another benefit of the system. And I think Judy's made valid points, certainly with the learning disabilities cohort. They're certainly not specific to the stoma issue, but certainly an issue that we do have across the board in trying to care for them. I don't want to go off topic too much, but last year there was certainly a push from the CCG with the voluntary sector about encouraging patients to come for their learning disability health checks, and also with the filling in of the pro formas to bring with them. That was very useful. And if that was something, again, off topic, but if that was something that we could do for next year, I think that'd be really beneficial for the patient of Sheffield.
Yeah, that could be included in that check, couldn't it, as well? They've got a stoma, and make sure.
Yeah, and I think probably you wouldn't need to change the pro forma too much, because it does ask about other systems and bowel issues and whatnot. And I suspect if someone with learning disabilities had a stoma, it'd be flagged up there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Judy, is that an old hand? Do you have another question? It's still up from before. Okay, it sounds really like an excellent proposal with some real improvements in outcomes and for the patients, especially Gareth was saying about that extra way of monitoring patients. So Zach, I've lost you, moved on the screen. Did you want to add anything, or is that okay?
No, that's fine. Just to thank Joe and the team for the hard work in pulling this together.
Yes, yeah, and from us as well. Thanks very much, Joe. Impressive piece of work, and it does take more time with the co-production, but it makes the outcome much better. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So does that mean that's okay? We carry on?
Yes, it does. Yeah, we've approved the recommendation to go ahead with it.
Great. Thank you all, and thanks for those suggestions.
Okay. At this point, can I just welcome Dr. Amir Afzal and Dr. Trish Edney, and also, hi Trish, and also Dominic Carroll, who's a new locality manager, who's joining us for this meeting. Welcome, Dominic. I know you've not got your video on at the moment. Oh, there you are. So welcome to the locality teams and the CCG. So.
Thank you very much. Really a pleasure to be here. Really
good. Okay, so we're now on to the next item, which is the standard operating procedure. And Louise, you're going to introduce this for us, I believe.
I am, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Louise Robinson, working in the primary care team, doing contracts and estates. Hopefully, you've all had a chance to read through the paper and the SOP being presented today, hopefully for approval, around implementing a new process or a more structured process for approving new or varied leases within the primary care team. The aim of the paper is hopefully just to alleviate some of that pressure that comes to PCCC on approvals of the leases. I know in the past we have had a couple that have come once they've gone through the process within the team and engagement with the district valuer, and the recommendation obviously of approving the lease to PCCC. Hopefully this standard operating procedure explains the process that we want to sort of document a bit more officially, that the process will be there in the background with approval with Jackie, Director of Finance, but giving PCCC that level of assurance of the process followed to get to that point. Obviously, we bring a primary care update report monthly to this meeting, so we can document either in there, if that's acceptable, or a separate paper summarising any leases that have been approved, and if there's anything that is a bit outside of the norm, then we will bring them to the meeting separately. This was shared with NHS England, and some comments were sent back and welcomed, so hopefully they've been reflected enough in the paper. Obviously, if there's any more detail that needs to be added, happy to do that, but we were just trying to keep it a bit kind of light touch, cover what needs to be covered in there, along with the process that we follow, which is at the Appendix 1, I believe. So yes, I suppose if there's any kind of questions around the process or what needs to be done, happy to sort of answer those ad hocly, or Abby, if there's anything else that you think you want to add to that.
Thanks, Louise. I just think to stress that that the SOP that you've developed together with Mike, I think, has got a really comprehensive now list of the criteria that we would consider in any when looking at any lease or lease variation that we would want to approve, and that will give, I think, a much more standardised approach and a pretty high degree of assurance, I hope, to the committee. I think it's also worth noting that that we did look to see if the process had been documented elsewhere, or you looked rather to see if the process had been documented elsewhere, and it looks like it hasn't. So hopefully this will be of use to others as well as ourselves going forward. And just to stress those, the twin aims being around freeing up time within this committee to focus on the sort of more pressing and the strategic and overall primary care issues, and also hopefully to speed up the process of approving leases for practices as well. Well, thank you very much for bringing it, Lou. Thanks.
Jackie, you had your hand up. Has Abby covered what you were going to say? Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good step forward, because I certainly know Mark in the past, Mark Gamsu, when we've been looking at the leases, and then if it's the first time we've looked at it, we haven't got that knowledge to be what areas to question. So having this first look through and then coming back to us if we need for assurance, really, through the primary care report or on an exceptional basis, is a better use of the time of this group, as well as more thorough process, I think. So thanks. I think it's a good idea. Are there any other questions or points that you wanted to make? Okay, so I can't see any. So if we can approve the SOP with regard to the leases, thanks very much, Louise, for coming and presenting that. Good piece of work, thanks. Okay, so moving on to the next item, which is the financial report at month 5 for 2021-22. So over to Jackie.
Thank you, Chris. So I'm Jackie Mills, I'm Director of Finance at Sheffield CCG. So this report is based on information to the end of August, and I would just like to draw out a few key points. As previously reported, there is a forecast overspend on the HEEDS budget, with the financial pressure all within the delegated budget. So at month 5, the delegated budget is just short of £500,000 overspent. And the expectation is that this will increase to circa 750,000 by the end of September. That is after utilisation of the contingency reserve, but before we've quantified some of the mitigations that I highlighted in my previous report. We expect to be able to give further clarity on those mitigations, and just for a reminder, they were things like the reserve we have for list size growth, the expected spend on locums, and premises revaluations. They should become clearer as we move into the second half of the year. The other thing I'd like to pull out is we've included in the report our latest estimate of spend against the additional roles reimbursement scheme. You'll remember that there's a level of baseline funding that we have in our allocation, but in addition, there's some central funding if we spend more than our baseline allocation. So at the moment, we're forecasting that we'll be eligible to draw down just short of £600,000 for the first half of the year. The forecast over the full year estimates that we'll draw down an extra 1.3 million of central funding, but I would like to highlight that's against a maximum that we would be eligible to draw down of 3.2 million. So our forecast spend is somewhat short of the maximum that we could claim if everyone had the roles fully in place for the full year. We are continuing to work with the primary care networks just to make sure that that estimate reflects all the planned recruitment. But additional roles are one of the areas that NHS England see as supporting primary care workforce. So I think it is important this committee is aware of the forecast spend. And then the last thing I just wanted to note was in terms of our CCG Commission service, the reported position includes additional spend to support the COVID-19 response, and that relates to additional in-hours and out-of-hours hubs, both hot hubs and cold hubs. We've been monitoring the utilisation of the hubs on a very regular basis. When we got the planning guidance in March, that did indicate that COVID funding would be phased out in the second half of the financial year. And obviously at the moment, with the ongoing rates of COVID transmission, we are expecting that the need for hubs will continue over the coming months. And in fact, we've been considering a case this week to increase the number of sessions and locations of in-hours hot hubs. So the need will continue, and we'll probably end up spending more over the second half of the year. I think whilst we're still waiting for guidance on the financial arrangements for the second half of the year, we did get some national announcements. You might have seen in the press, there were some announcements about funding for the NHS for the second 6 months. That did include some additional funding from Treasury for the ongoing COVID response. So I'm hopeful that we will get some funding to support some of this additional spend, but as yet we don't have the information to say how much we'll receive as an individual CCG. So I think that's the main bits I wanted to just draw out from the report, but I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions for Jackie or any comments? Oh, just Gareth.
Oh, thanks, Jackie. It's just a comment, really. I'm sure it's been mentioned before in that some of the difficulty with the funding attached to the ARRS roles is about actually being able to get bodies into the roles, and sometimes you're advertising for people that don't exist. And I think we've mentioned previously at meetings about how we try and utilise the funding, and it's appeared previously that actually CCG have very little room for manoeuvre in utilising the funding for other things, which is a shame. But the cynic within me suspects that NHS England know that, and know they can promise money that actually they'll not have to part with because the people aren't out there. And there isn't really necessarily a solution to that. The particular issues around Sheffield are to do with the transformational mental health workers, and also the paramedics in particular. I'd be grateful if there's an update, but I suspect actually the situation is still very similar now as to how it was previously.
Yeah, just a few things to draw out, because clearly the NHS England have decided to retain some of the additional roles funding centrally, because they know that there is potential for that not to be fully committed. I think workforce continues to be our kind of key issue to resolve, and I think there's probably well, if it goes in previous years, and I don't know if Victoria's heard any rumblings, what they have allowed is for any national underspend to be people to put forward proposals to bring forward recruitment to roles that they would plan to take forward the following financial year. So I do suspect, given the level of underspend that we're reporting and neighbouring CCGs are reporting, that there might be an opportunity to do that. So there is probably some work we need to be getting ready for, and to see if that gives us any capacity. But I think, Gareth, you're right there. It's the pool of people that are out there to actually draw into these roles, which is the rate limiting factor. I was on a meeting this morning with Yorkshire Ambulance Service, and the rotational paramedics was discussed, but equally their workforce capacity constraints are the same as we've described more generally. They're struggling to retain people, and they have massive workforce pressures. So I think things like rotational schemes may be attractive to attract people, but clearly we're all competing for a very limited workforce.
Yeah, and I think you look at the whole situation, you think, well, if someone's waiting 2.5 hours for an emergency response ambulance for a stroke, and that's with the number of ambulances, paramedics they have now, actually, if you take paramedics from the acute ambulance services into general practice and primary care, then the acute ambulance service isn't going to improve either. So yeah, I think everywhere's under strain, and everywhere's trying to do the best with the resources, and if you don't increase the baseline number of staff, you just end up robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
And I don't quite know what the solution is, but I suspect a lot of us appreciate that that's the scenario we're in.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We've got Abby and then Zach.
Thanks, Chris. It was just to follow on from what Jackie was saying, that we have actually our finance team have actually gone out this week to ask networks whether they would be whether they had plans that they could or were considering putting plans in place where they could potentially use more ARRS funded roles if the funding was available. So maybe we could include ARRS roles, what we currently have in post, and what the allocation is in the workforce report that we're developing in the primary care update paper. So I can put that in for next month, which will give an initial indication of what things look like. And just to say, as you say, Gareth, I think what you said was exactly right. That is one of the reasons why I think YASA is quite understandably nervous about some of those paramedic roles and wants to have some input into that process. And we also know that there are a number of other roles that are constrained now, like the pharmacist roles. Networks are struggling to recruit pharmacists too. So there is a lot about the art of the possible in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Abby. Zach?
Yeah, just to say that it is a nationwide problem. I work in Derbyshire, exactly the same. We're all fishing out the same pond, and the people just aren't there. Another interesting aside is talking to community pharmacy colleagues. They're now finding that they're losing staff to PCNs, and they're now struggling to actually sort of provide the basic core pharmacy contract. So the workforce crisis is a massive issue, and I think we do need to have an honest conversation about it. Certainly recently, as trying to retain staff in general practice, some of the adverse publicity that we've had in some of our press has certainly not been helpful, and certainly doesn't encourage people to come in to both the profession and that part of the profession. So I think we do need to have an honest conversation about this, because it really is a big issue. The pressures are huge. I do a Monday morning surgery, which is supposed to be 4 hours, well, it's supposed to be 3 hours 40 minutes long, and I did just under 6 hours on Monday, which is the busiest I've ever been. The interesting thing is that I do it as a locum, so I could have just walked away after 3 hours 40 minutes, but chose not to, because it's the practice that I locum in, and I do have a degree of sort of ownership of the practice. It's a massive issue. The second busiest Monday I had was the week before. The third busiest was the week before that, and it's just September. So the pressures are massive. It's like a war zone out there. And anyone that doesn't believe that's welcome to come out and spend a day in a practice, or indeed go and spend a day in the hospital, see the pressures across the system. It really is getting quite critical. So, again, like Gareth, I don't know what the answer is. I think we're going to maximise all the support we can, and I think we're doing everything to do that. We are lobbying for as much flexibility nationally, particularly around the extended roles, and a reduction in the bureaucracy that's attached to it, which is the last thing the practices need, is to do the bureaucratic process at the moment. So, we're doing as much as we can, but I think we just need to keep the pressure on. But also, I think part of it is be honest about it. The public expectations have got to reflect the capacity that we've got within the system, or else the system will fail. So it's a really difficult time at the moment.
Thanks, Zach. It's definitely an issue we've come back to over the last 12, 18 months and longer. And we have been, and Abby has been especially working on some practical ideas that we can put in place. We have got some discussion on the private meeting, which hopefully we will bring back into public. And also we do want to have some extended time on this, which we've got some proposals for. But yes, it's really tricky, even with the resource to recruit, as Gareth said, and that we just isn't the people out there. So, and we need to think medium term and short term, don't we? Because we're in this position now. So yeah, it's certainly high on this group's agenda to try and do something to mitigate against this issue. Just going back to the finance, Jackie, So potentially you're saying that there may be some slippage in the workforce spend, but if it does come, if we do recruit to them, then we could be overspent. Is that correct? Just checking that out.
So there'll be slippage against the central funding that's retained by NHS England. So it won't be that we can.
It won't be for us. They'll get the slippage. Okay. Oh, sorry. I was thinking that might help where we've got some other overspend, but it'll all be earmarked as well, won't it? And so we've got more information about the second half of the year now, but not all of it. And where they said there'd be no COVID funding, there is some, but you don't know how much. Is that right? Sorry,
exactly right, yeah.
Checking I've got picked it up. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, so each of these finance updates are really vital because we're getting information incrementally, which makes it very hard to plan as well, doesn't it?
It does. The planning timescales have been really difficult to make sure that we're utilising funding effectively and can plan it. You know, we know a lot of the pressures that we are facing are recurrent systemic pressures, as Zach's described, and yet we're leaping from 6 months to 6 months, which makes it really difficult. So we are trying not to be too risk averse and anticipate what we might have going forward. Actually, to some extent, the primary care allocation has been reasonably stable compared to some of the other allocations in the wider CCG budgets. But next time I will be bringing back a plan that sets out the plan for the second half of the year. The planning and the arrangements for 2022-23 are still some way off being confirmed, but we will look forward about what the pressures are for 22-23.
Thank you. So unless there are any other questions or points, Judy, have you got your hand up and I've missed you? Sorry.
It's all right. I was just conscious that both Gareth and Zach, and this may not be the right time to say it, but have made really relevant and strong points about the workforce issue and have been clear. And as Jackie's just said, it's a system issue. So I'm wondering, you know, what is our response to that? What Zach said, we need to be honest and talking. So, you know, are we going to recommend to governing body that there's some kind of risk safety summit, which is what we put in place if it was a provider, for example? Or, you know, what are we going to do to have that conversation? Because there may well be some, as Abby said, to the possible, some solutions that might be short term, but then I think that having the conversation about, well, what's the longer term plan? And I know that at the previous meeting we were talking about you know, the approach to growing your own and looking at how we can fund places for and whether that's nurses, paramedics, whatever, to train.
Yeah, so I think as Abby something noted, I think Chris noted, there is a discussion in the private session of this meeting around some of those. Abby and Sandy have been working on some of the areas where we're looking at primary care capacity in the wider sense and how we might address some of those. So I think the problems have probably been quite well rehearsed in terms of the solutions and how we address some of those. I think that's still a work in progress. It is on our risk register already in terms of primary care capacity and the impact. And when we looked at the governing body assurance framework at our governing body, we did note this as one of, you know, a critical risk. So I think we have identified the risks, we've identified the problems. The solutions, both short term and long term, are what we're working on at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay. I can't see any other hands up. Yeah, it is. Well, as Jackie just said, really, we've got to try and put some short-term things in place, and particularly the work that's going on, looking at where the risks are that need some immediate support, because there's some areas and some areas of work will be under more pressure than others at the moment. But just we'll register, you know, again, in terms of feedback to the governing body and to audit about the risk and the points we made before about the workforce capacity. And there is discussion, isn't there, going on at governing body level as well, and across the system, including the ICS system that we've got coming in. So thank you for those really important points. We will be coming back to this. So if we could move on to the next item on the agenda, if that's okay with you. And we were asked to consider the finance plan.
Sorry,
and then we focused on the workforce. Sorry.
Abby just had her hand up.
Sorry. Oh, did she? I missed it. Thank you.
Sorry, thanks, Chris. It was just to note that primary care workforce is in fact a risk on the corporate risk register already. So it is recognised in that way too. And
thank you. Yeah.
I have to say, Chris, I was obviously as a governing body member, I'm well aware of that. I was making the point about what I heard, I think, it was about that discussion collectively together with partners and being open and honest in that way. So
yeah, and that needs widening if it isn't already. It sounds like there are some discussions going on already, but just to note those key points that people are raising, the system-wide nature of it, as well as looking at some immediate risk as well in the present. So I've got Zach. Abby, is that your hand from before, or did you want to come back in?
Just really briefly, I think fortunately in Sheffield we are in a good position in that we are still quite good at retaining staff and attracting staff, but that's from elsewhere. So it is the same pond that we're fishing in. So I think we probably are in a stronger position than some areas. I would say the situation is probably more desperate in Derbyshire, and we are getting practices that are really struggling and talking about handing back contracts and stuff. So I think we're probably in a better position in Sheffield than some areas, but it really is getting quite critical. And I think we're back to some fundamental conversations that people probably don't want to have. But how do we attract people? I mean, the NHS relies on goodwill. So what I just talked about on Monday is goodwill. I wanted to stay on at the practice because I wanted to help them out. It relies on goodwill from staff, but to let that to survive in that, you've got to have goodwill from elsewhere. And I haven't seen a lot of goodwill from the press over the last couple of weeks. You sometimes don't get goodwill from the politicians. Some of the chaos around the vaccine rollout has really just increased the pressure on practices, has not helped, and doesn't again seem to be goodwill. The fact that the vaccine rollout next phase is announced in Sky News is not goodwill and is actually disrespectful to the workforce that are really busting their gut to deliver this. So I think it's a big conversation that we need to have. And it is hard because, this is a public meeting and, do you have these conversations in private? I think you've got to do both. I think we need to bring it into the public domain and have the conversation about what are realistic expectations, because we also do have a duty of care to our staff and we can't allow them to burn out. So I think we're in a better position than most. I know these conversations are ongoing. I just want to highlight this isn't just Sheffield, this is much wider. And actually in Sheffield, I think we're in a stronger position, but also we're prepared to talk about it at an earlier stage, which I think, again, gives us more opportunity around some of the solutions. So just to be clear that we're all absolutely bursting a gut to find solutions to this. It's difficult because it's stuff that's happened over a long period of time. And it's complex. So we need to have, like you say, the short, medium, and the long-term solutions. So just to reassure everything, we are doing everything we can, and we're really working together to try and do that across the whole system.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks. The original discussion started from the finance paper because obviously the item is also influenced by finance as well. And we were just asked to consider the final reported financial position at month 5, which we have done. So that is okay with you, Jackie. We'll move on to the next item. So we've got, we were just talking about formal names earlier. You prefer Tom, don't you, Thomas Cragg? Is that correct?
That's absolutely fine. When I write it down, it's Thomas. When I speak, it's Tom. So.
All right. So we'll call you Tom. I have been asking people to introduce themselves actually when they spoke, which is remiss of me as chair. So do you want to introduce yourself and say what your role is? And then if we can have your update on the digital programme.
No problem. Thank you very much. So I'm Tom Cragg, Deputy Director of IT Development and Improvement at Sheffield CCG. We're presenting the digital programme update that was circulated prior to the meeting. I'll just draw out a few key points rather than go throughout the whole paper. So for the last couple of months, we've been reporting around the delays to the Wi-Fi controllers causing issues with the project to roll out the corporate Wi-Fi across practices. Those controllers have now been received. At the time of writing, the installation was underway, but the first set have been installed at 722. So that project and that rollout can now proceed. So that's some very positive news. We'll just draw your attention to KPI number 1. So in the report, you can see that we've not achieved the 95% target in the last 3 months. It's very close, but not quite achieved. So we put some processes in place and an improvement plan just to make sure that we get as close as possible to that. But during that period during that same period, the average answer time on the phone still remains below 30 seconds. So it's just failing across certain peaks in the month. The last point I'd just like to draw out is we've received some calls with slow running at sites. What we've done is created a new process where we have a multi-discipline team working on the investigation, because sometimes it's clinical system slowness, sometimes it's network slowness, sometimes it's PC or laptop slowness. So we've got across a joint working group where we also get clinical systems providers where necessary to dial in, and we have engineers on site, and that seems to have been really positive. And we've also worked across the ICS area with other CCGs to sort of talk about their issues as well. So hopefully we'll see that's positively received, and we'll see improvements in IT performance across the area.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions for Tom or any comments? Gareth?
Oh, hi, and thanks, Tom. It was just a quick question. I think we've mentioned this before. Is there any further update on ICE label printers?
There is. So this was discussed again at LMC this morning. So what we've done, we've currently got a small stock of the ICE label printers, and we've had funding approved through the GPIT refresh budget, which we've not received yet, but we've had approval to purchase 100 ICE label printers for stock next year. For later this year. What we will do is we'll manage that stock. It will be break, fix, and refresh, and we'll report regularly on how that stock is being utilised, and then we'll put processes in place should it become if we start to deplete that stock, then we can look at what comes next. But obviously we're governed by what funding comes in, so we'll use the deployment pattern this year to inform future decisions.
Yeah, and then the only other thing was a more personal note. I think we had flagged up to you before about the speed of our IT and our network, and we're not sure what you did, but whatever you've done has certainly improved it. So
thank you
very much for that.
Did you just unplug it and plug it back in again?
I don't know, but I was rebooting, it hadn't worked. So no, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. It's good to get some direct feedback of what's worked, Tom, I would think. Okay. Sounds like quite a few areas of progress, and including the printers that we talked about last time. So thank you for that and for that update. And I think we'll move on to the next item if there isn't any other points, but thank you for coming and speaking to the meeting and for all the work behind it. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay, so the next item is report circulated for noting, and the GP patient survey was circulated. Are there any comments on that? I think we're going to look at it at the development session, aren't we, Abby? But welcome to make any points at the moment. And we're still analysing some of the information, is that right?
We've completed a lot of the analysis. And that's set out, a lot of that is set out in this paper. So the plan was just to give the committee an opportunity to read through that in advance of the development session next month, where we're planning to provide a more interactive session and an informal discussion about what the results say and what approaches and plans we can put in place as a result of that.
Thanks, Abby, that's useful. So the next items are any items of any other business. No, we haven't been sent any in advance either. And then the escalation of risk to audit and the governance committee, integrated governance committee. I think the two things I want to do, well, first of all, the issue about finance and particularly the issues relating to primary care, but that will be on the governing body agenda anyway, won't it, Jackie? But hopefully, not hopefully, but we can input at that point any specifics around primary care. The other one is the workforce and the capacity, and I think it's been previously escalated. We've said it's on the risk register, but I'd still like, because it feels, well, it is more urgent and immediate, as well as needing for some medium-term planning as well. So I'd still like to have that go to escalation to governing body, and so we can get feedback about system-wide approaches as well at ICS. With regard to the audit, again, we have noted the risk of this, but there's probably some in the moment discussions and issues that certainly just to flag up to audit. It's not that this work isn't being done, it's just that these are really important issues that are immediate. So I would just like that to be fed up. There are other important things that we've talked about in terms of new services. They don't need to be escalated to governing body, but yeah, I would like some recognition of developing in terms of work with the standard operating procedure and the leases and the Stormer service, because they are really good to improve patients' outcomes and also our processes so that we can act more efficiently. So I will add those on. Because it's important we focus on the positive as well as dealing with some of our challenges, particularly at the moment. So thank you for that. So the next meeting in public is on the 18th of November at 1:30. We're live streaming, which I'll bring to an end because we've got a private governing body meeting after this. So can I stop the live streaming, Lucy?